I never would have thought that I would actually dedicate time to explain the character development of the newcomers. At first, it seems like the Singing Strays are nothing more of a plot device to divide and complicate the friendship between Todd and Copper. And to an extent, they are. But once again, this movie manages to surprise me by going a little bit deeper. Once you get past the jarring change in atmosphere and the introduction of ridiculous and crazy characters, the dynamic between Cash and Dixie actually has a lot more nuance than I would expect a Disney sequel to ever have. Filmmakers could have just settled with making them a typical arguing couple that only exists for the sake of comedy and overdramatic, unnatural conflict. However, this movie actually takes the time to characterize both of them and explain their complicated relationship, further helping the viewer understand the motivations behind the actions of each character. So let's explore it, shall we? Cash and Dixie are clearly meant to be romantically involved, but when we first see them, we quickly learn that they are prone to excessive bickering and have had several arguments in the past. We know this because these two dogs have experienced their feud so many times that they've turned it into a game.
I got 2 bones on Dixie. I'll cover that.
Dixie seems to be the classic diva drama queen, who complains about even minute things, causing Cash to act patronizingly towards her, but it only angers Dixie further and causes more tension between them.
It just so happens I am a professional, and my standards...
Oh, now, Dixie, darling, you put on that same old record every day. Ain't it just about wore out by now?
You have some nerve talking to me that way, Cash.
After she quits, Cash tries to make amends with her by claiming that it was just harmless teasing, but she's having none of it.
I was only teasing you. You know how I feel about you.
Yeah, you have a lousy way of showing it.
Just like Todd and Copper, this creates a clear contrast between the two characters. They're both stubborn, which is the one character trait which they seem to share, but otherwise, Cash is more calm and impervious, not losing his composure over a little conflict, and acting with a sense of authority and maturity, whereas Dixie is easily irritable, becoming frustrated when disrespected and acts more childishly. With this in mind, it wouldn't be hard to recognize who seems to be more of the villain. But, in this movie's true fashion, it doesn't seek out to antagonize any one character. As the film progresses, we both see flaws with Cash and can empathize with Dixie, especially after Copper joins the band, where Cash is now shown to be less lenient and incredibly bossy. He seems to be on edge just because he really wants to impress the talent scout, which is fine on its own. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having dreams, but it comes to the point where he neglects the well-being of his band members, especially Copper. His character only gets worse after he tries to persuade Copper that leaving his friends and commitments is the only way he will ever be able to succeed in life.
Oh, Cash, I'm supposed to meet Todd soon
Whoa. We can't let nobody hold us back. We're Hound dudes, remember?
However, despite his stubborn, authoritarian attitude, Cash still does display a range of deeper emotions and thoughts, revealing that there once was a time where Dixie meant everything to him, and that even now he still harbors some feelings for her. This shows that it's even hard for the strict leader Cash himself to solely focus on success, humanizing the characters in this movie even further. Still, by the end of this interaction, Cash isn't that distraught over losing Dixie.
I guess I'd be stretching if I said I didn't want her around sometimes. But we're a couple of Hound dudes now, remember? We can't let old friends get in the way of that, right?
But he could just be suppressing his feelings in order to avoid showing weakness and to continue to glorify the band, ensuring that Copper will want to stay and doesn't become skeptical on whether he should trust Cash. And although this desire to teach Copper to forget about others does make Cash kind of an unlikable character, at the very least, it's interesting and impressive that the movie manages to make you think that there's one primary antagonist, and then reveal that another character is just as responsible, if not more so, for the conflict in the movie. Additionally, this interaction gives Copper sort of a premonition, like a warning of the lonely and greedy person he might become if he chooses to neglect his friendships, and that success clearly is not able to fix all the emotional emptiness in his life, as Cash, the character who was literally named after money, is still a little sad after he pushed away the person he cared for the most. Even though in this same scene Copper seems to willingly forget about Todd and commit entirely to the band, we do still clearly see that Copper is still torn about whom he should be loyal to. This internal struggle is eventually resolved when Copper realizes the full negative extent of his decision to abandon Todd for the band after talking with Dixie, and he decides that his friendship is most important to him. This explains why Copper eventually decides to stay with Todd. Until he grows up, of course. As a result of realizing the importance of relationships, Copper reassembles the band, assuring Cash and Dixie that they belong together, and Cash confirms that his connection with Dixie is more important to him than anything the band's success could ever give him.
Well, there you go, Cash. You just got what you always wanted.
Well, maybe I had it all along.
But honestly, if there's any character that doesn't have a completely satisfying end to their arc, it's Cash. His final decision to stay with Dixie doesn't make complete sense, considering the last thing we heard Cash say regarding Dixie was,
But we're a couple of hound dudes now, remember? We can't let old friends get in the way of that, right?
this single moment where Copper recites the lyrics of the original song they sang together is the only thing that resparks their romance. But I have to admit, it is still pretty effective, as it presents an interesting and ironic situation. Earlier, Cash was the one convincing Copper that success is more important than friends. But that mindset is ultimately overpowered, funnily enough, by Copper himself, that same impressionable kid.
Just exactly why did you get us all together?
'Cause that's how it ought to be. Like the words in the song.
The authoritative, single-minded Cash couldn't even impress a professional mentality upon his own pupil. Rather, it's Copper himself who ends up convincing Cash that his relationship with Dixie is more important than material gain. Naturally, Cash would be pretty surprised and maybe even a little impressed that Copper was able to maintain his own values throughout all of Cash's stubborn brainwashing. And considering how much effort Copper put into reassembling the band, I guess it makes sense that Cash would feel obligated to allow Dixie back into his life so that all that effort isn't wasted, right? The reason I've had a hard time finding a way to describe and justify Cash's character arc is because, well, he just simply doesn't have a good enough end to his development. I guess while trying to defend this movie and explain how it actually does manage to succeed with many of its character arcs, I forgot that it is possible for this movie to have some mistakes as well, which is unfortunate because I specifically put Cash in thinking he would have just as great of development as the other three, but I guess I disappointed myself. The thing about Cash is that there are two problems regarding him, both of which are separate from each other, but both have the same solution. First one is that the movie explicitly makes him out to be the contrast of Dixie, whom is seemingly the villain, then makes him just as stubborn and self-centered as Dixie, therefore making him the villain. Then Dixie makes the tremendous mistake of ruining Cash's dreams, and Cash is rightfully mad at her, making him seem to be a good guy again. So it goes from good guy to villain to good guy? But his flawed attributes are still present. The fact that Dixie did something worse doesn't nullify that. The movie wants to make him a good guy, but it never takes the time to develop his character in a way where he naturally learns to be more tolerant and accepting of friendship. He just keeps a strict and bossy attitude by the end. And what makes it worse is that even though Dixie caused the main problem, she learned from her mistakes and felt guilty about it, improving as a person as a result. Cash never does. He's a pretty flat character, and the little nuance that we do get from him is often contradicted by the many actions he commits that prove otherwise. Such as when he claims to care about Dixie, yet doesn't seem too distraught about firing her. Even in this scene where he says that he does like her company, he's overly positive when telling Copper that they should let go of old friends to focus on their dreams.
I guess I'd be stretching if I said I didn't want her around sometimes. But we're a couple of hound dudes now, remember? We can't let old friends get in the way of that, right?
The audience is ultimately left with the feeling that he really doesn't care about her.
Gosh, I missed you.
Yeah, you have a lousy way of showing it.
The second problem is with this ending. It is the least nuanced thing in this entire movie, which is sad considering how well the movie was doing so far with its character dynamics beforehand. But the way the filmmakers make Cash eventually decide to make amends with Dixie feels so superficial and unrealistic.
Just exactly why did you get us all together?
All that happens is Copper says a vague line about how,
That's how it ought to be.
and then sings a song, which everyone joins in on. Then Dixie starts singing and Cash smiles. Then later, he reveals that he missed her and should have valued her all along. Keep in mind that this is the same Cash who intimidated a child by towering over him to try and convince him to be professional, and becomes furious with that same kid just because he lied about a simple fact so he could stay in the band that he loved to sing in. And firing Copper did not make him willing to accept Dixie back either. No, he was just as mad at her for ruining everything as well. If there's one thing this movie characterizes Cash as, it's stubborn. He does not change his mind easily, and if he has to, he will manipulate the circumstances to get what he wants. Why then is the guy who is never shown to be lenient and never learns to be less strict in any way, why is he so easily influenced by such basic arguments? He should still be mad at both Dixie and Copper, but the movie just really wants a quick, happy ending, I guess. So it disregards Cash's previous personality just so we can get a positive resolution to Cash and Dixie's romance. I know he says he always cared for Dixie, but nothing else in this movie seems to genuinely indicate that. He only ever says he likes her, but everything he does to her shows that he really is a single-minded person who doesn't care about others' feelings as long as he gets what he wants. Both these problems would be easily solved if the movie just took some time to develop Cash's character a bit. Actually show him becoming guilty about lashing out at Copper, or make him realize that the harsh person he's become is pushing everyone he cares for away. Maybe make him talk with Copper one-on-one to make it more personal and genuine. That would have been a cool juxtaposition to the Dixie and Copper talk, where she inspired Copper to reevaluate his actions, and therefore Copper is forwarding that inspiration to Cash. Just like Dixie told Copper that Todd only wanted to restore their friendship, Copper could tell Cash that Dixie didn't want to ruin his dreams either, but rather was merely upset that he seemed to forget all about her. All Dixie wanted was for Cash to respect her again, which shows that she does legitimately care about their relationship. Therefore, Cash would be inspired by this conversation and realize that he'd been very neglectful to everyone around him, and through his sorrow he'd want to apologize to the entire band, especially Dixie, for everything he'd put them through. They'd forgive each other, just like Todd and Copper, both having learned to be less selfish and respect one another more, realizing the true, irreplaceable value of relationships. This ending would feel like a much more natural, genuine, and emotionally impactful conclusion to their dynamic. But what we got instead was a rushed, forced, and ultimately unsatisfying ending which amended their relationship without actually taking the time to develop Cash's character in a natural way, meaning his eventual decision to rekindle their romance makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, Dixie's willingness to accept Cash back into her life and her desire to make amends with him does make sense considering her great character arc, where she learns to be less stubborn and selfish and actually respects the desires of everyone else as well. But we just don't get any of that development with Cash. I'm sorry for ranting. I don't necessarily hate Cash, but I just feel like out of all the great main characters in this movie, the filmmakers definitely could have improved upon his development. Don't get me wrong, it's not like he's as bad as any of the characters from the Fox and Hound 1. I like his leadership and calmness that really contrast Dixie's dramatic attitude and selfishness, and I like the turn where he suddenly becomes an antagonist. I guess I just don't like his ending. Yeah, he gets along with Dixie better than ever now, and does realize the importance of relationships. That's a great part of his development. I like it. I just feel like it's a little undeserved. You could argue that this movie had to juggle two different dynamics, so naturally the secondary one would go less in depth, as the friendship between Todd and Copper should be the main focus. But I just expected that a movie that was so great at naturally intertwining multiple character developments with each other, making them work really well together, would have had a more satisfying end to one of its primary characters. Better conclusion to his development definitely would have made him feel a bit more real and human, rather than just another basic, condescending antagonist. Dixie, the classic diva of the group. You know, who's very narcissistic and selfish and becomes easily annoyed. She's the overdramatic one that constantly tests Cash and the rest of the band's patience, wanting every little thing to be perfect and becoming greatly upset when she doesn't get her way. The classic villain, right? And considering the fact that Cash and Dixie are supposed to be in a romantic relationship, she doesn't really seem to be the most supportive and thoughtful partner. So why am I dedicating my time to talking about her if she's so one-dimensional? Well, I hope you've already guessed that's because, big surprise, she's not actually as flat as she may first seem. She's a little bit of a diva, sure, but her personality and true intentions are not automatically evil either. Her more deeper thoughts and feelings are revealed later once she starts talking to Todd, being able to relate to his situation. They both lost someone they deeply cared about, as both Copper and Cash pursued success and physical gain rather than their emotional connections with others. This conversation eventually leads them to the song Good Doggy No Bone. This song reveals that the band was once an exciting and promising experience for Dixie, and she actually had fun and enjoyed the idea of success. But her viewpoint on the worth of the band changed after she felt she was no longer getting the recognition and consideration that was once plentiful from Cash.
Till you ask for a little consideration, then they call you a diva, pink slip, termination.
Now, Dixie is less committed and more irritable, as the band seems to be more restrictive and oriented on the business side of things rather than the fun experience it used to be. We also receive insight on Dixie's feelings of fame. She tells Todd that it may seem glorious at first, but it's ultimately very lonely and unrewarding.
It's lonely at the top when the lights go down and the cheering stops. You got no real friends, no place to call home.
Knowing this, you start to understand Dixie's mindset, and therefore her motivations are definitely more complex and relatable than you'd initially think. After angrily quitting once Cash essentially After angrily quitting once Cash essentially insulted her for, among other things, replacing her with Copper.
You don't mean to tell me that wet behind the ears puppy could ever take my place in a band?
I didn't say that, although he does have that refreshing bloom of youth about him.
Just what exactly are you saying?
She seems to want nothing to do with Cash, even after he tries to apologize, clearly still mad at him, which would seem to fit her already established personality. Her desire to be the best and not disrespected is further shown by her frustration after Cash is happy to fire her from the band, even though she already quit.
The nerve of that Cash! Where does he get off firing me?
Oh, I thought you quit.
I guess what she wanted to happen was to get Cash to continually beg her to come back, making her feel superior, and then she eventually would after she had calmed down. Definitely a diva complex, if you ask me. Especially after she claims that she is the
Band's heart and soul! It's plain as a pig on a sofa!
But again, she already quit. Clearly she wants her place back, but she doesn't want to submit to Cash, which is a bit childish. A more mature character would have apologized, not letting a pointless argument continue wrecking their relationship. But when you give her the benefit of the doubt, which the movie seems to want you to do as it progresses, you may actually be able to relate to and understand her complex intentions on a deeper level. Not trying to make connections where they don't exist or anything, but this is kind of similar to Chirin's motivation in Ringing Bell when you think about it. Sure, the circumstances are very different in each movie. I mean, Ringing Bell is much, much darker compared to The Fox and Hound 2, but the whole idea of a stubborn character not wanting to be submissive and instead desiring more power and authority as a form of affirming to oneself one's own worth, it's present with both Dixie and Chirin. And in both scenarios, I can understand and relate to a fear of showing weakness or wrongness, not wanting to give another the satisfaction of being right, and, more significantly, not wanting to feel inferior to those whom have asserted dominance over you. Is it a just motivation? Well, more so in Ringing Bell than in The Fox and Hound 2, but at least it's understandable in both. It's worth noting that, despite her desire to be the best and not show any signs of weakness, when Dixie is by herself, she allows herself to display feelings of sorrow regarding her falling out with Cash, and legitimately does still want him around. Even if she puts on a facade indicating that she would be fine without him, the audience is ultimately left with the feeling that she really does care about him. Unlike Cash, who immediately brushes off his remaining feelings for Dixie. This shows that Dixie's character has a lot more consistent depth than her shallow and selfish exterior seemed to at first convey. She isn't just manipulating Cash's feelings in order to get what she wants, like you might expect from a diva character, but rather she legitimately cares for him. But since Cash is very patronizing and critical of her, she feels as if the relationship is mostly one-sided, as she seems to care much more for him than he respects her.
All that he can think about is fortune and fame. There ain't nothing I can do to turn his head and excite him. Sometimes I swear I just want to bite him.
Naturally, that kind of unhealthy relationship would be very upsetting for Dixie.
Tell you what, Dixie, you rehearse, and afterwards I'll give that piece of wood a good old talking to, all right?
It just so happens I am a professional, and my standards...
Oh, now, Dixie, darling, you put on that same old record every day. Ain't it just about wore out by now?
You have some nerve talking to me that way, Cash.
As she believes that, if anything, Cash is the one manipulating her to get what he wants, not the other way around.
That Cash can talk a dog off a meat truck. He talked me into getting sweet on him, and now he tosses me away like yesterday's cornbread.
Therefore, Dixie doesn't just want to beg her way back into the band, as she doesn't want to have to surrender and submit to Cash, as that would be demoralizing and would weaken her own self-image. Instead, she wants to manipulate the circumstances to ensure she'll get her place back. First with the peanut butter incident, and after that fails, she conspires with Todd to reveal that Copper isn't actually a stray to get him kicked out of the band.
You sure this is a good idea?
It's the only way. When Clem Clodkicker over there gets to the fair and sees Copper, he'll bring him home for sure. You two will get to be friends again, and I'll reclaim my rightful place in the spotlight.
And this plan works. In quotation marks. Because it ends up destroying the entire fair in the process. And Cash does not just welcome Dixie back either. He is extremely angry with her after figuring out that this whole thing was her plan. Which is fair, I mean, she did ruin his chances at everything he ever dreamed of. But in her defense, though, she didn't mean to destroy everything, just Copper's career. Yeah, that's not really a justifiable intention either, though. And I'm sure Cash really doesn't care what her intentions are once everything is already ruined. But my question is, what made Cash think it was Dixie who destroyed the fair? I mean, technically it was all her idea, but Cash's only evidence is that she was on the Ferris wheel that crashed into the building. But it's not like she can control the thing, it did that on its own. So Cash really has no basis on this accusation.
Dixie, what have you done?
But I digress. Cash has a right to be angry with her, as she clearly did do the wrong thing. You might think this would make her an unlikable and terrible person at this point, right? Well, once again, this movie surprised me. Because Dixie's character actually develops, and improves in a much more realistic and nuanced way than I expected. It's Cash's disappointment in her, as well as the destruction she witnesses, that makes Dixie reevaluate herself, her character, and the harm that she has caused while trying to get what she wanted. The movie spends a great amount of time showing Dixie visually realizing the drastic negative effects of her actions and feeling legitimately guilty about it. For the first time, she doesn't seem upset, frustrated, or narcissistic, but rather, she's genuinely sorry. As a result, Dixie remembers the importance of support and loyalty, and since she knows that it would be virtually impossible for her to resolve things with Cash on her own, she doesn't. But she does realize that she owes it to Todd and Copper to help restore their friendship, which was caught in the crossfires of the conflict between her and Cash. Plus, the entire plan was her idea, so of course she would feel responsible and want to amend things in any way she can. And considering her unbiased viewpoint on their friendship, I assume she thinks Copper would be more likely to believe her testimony than Todd's.
I just want to ruin everything.
The act of trying to amend Todd and Copper's friendship really shows how much Dixie has grown as a person, as she learns to be more selfless and considerate of others, which directly contrasts the diva personality which we were shown at the beginning. And I know I already covered this scene in Copper's analysis, but I just want to reiterate that it's just so genuine feeling and impactful. It's easily one of, if not my most favorite scene in the movie, maybe even the franchise as a whole.
I just thought you should know that blowing your cover was my idea, not Todd's. I guess I just lost sight of what's really important. And darling, I'm awful sorry. He never wanted to hurt you. He just wanted you to be his friend again.
Out of everyone in this film, Dixie arguably has the greatest character arc, considering how drastically her personality changes from when we first meet her to the end. I mean, Todd and Copper both begin and end with the same personality and values, just further solidified due to their experiences together. And Cash? Well, we already know that he doesn't really have any significant development at any point in this movie, so... Dixie, however, starts out as a complete diva, desiring nothing but the utmost respect and consideration, and becoming easily angered when she doesn't get it. But after realizing her own faults and everything wrong that she did, she undergoes a character change which results in a more compassionate, respectful, and overall, a more mature Dixie. And yes, I know everyone learns to be more mature by the end, but Dixie's the only one who seems to have an entirely new and improved personality as well. And I may be starting to be a broken record, but again, this movie surprised me. This character arc was actually executed very well. I mean, it's not the most revolutionary narrative in the world, but considering how underdeveloped the first movie was, and that this is a direct-to-DVD Disney sequel, yeah, it's pretty impressive. Anyways, to wrap things up, Dixie's newfound kindness leads her to help amend Copper and Todd's friendship, and that help is ultimately paid back as the pair decides to help amend Cash and Dixie's relationship. So Cash and Dixie are reunited, Todd and Copper are reunited, and we finally get our happy ending. Okay, you ready for this concluding statement? It's gonna be great. Okay, I'll think of something. On 3. 1, 2...
Oh, I got nothing.